Well, hey John, nice to see you.
Thanks
for coming in to see us here. We're going to be talking a little bit today about registered disability savings plans. And so it's fantastic to have one of the experts here to let us know more about it. So thought we'd start with just a series of questions. So can you tell us what is a registered disability savings plan and who exactly qualifies to be a beneficiary?
Yeah, great question. So maybe I'll give a little history first. If you remember our old finance minister, Jim Flaherty, many years ago, in 2006 and 7, when he was still with us, he had 2 disabled children. Okay. And part of his whole crusade was, what happens to my children after I'm gone? So in 2008, the federal government introduced this program called the Registered Disability Savings Plan, which allows individuals who are disabled to save money, get some generous government grants, but have some type of retirement savings in the future when they're older. Because in many cases, if they're disabled, you may not have the ability to create income, put savings away, you're limited to different amounts that you can hold. So this was kind of the brainchild of his, knowing his children's scenario and what happens when he passes away. So the RDSP, it is a federal government program that allows anyone who's disabled, but they have to have 3 things to qualify. 1, they have to be a Canadian resident, which most people qualify for. They have to have a SIN number, again, which most people will qualify for. And they have to be receiving the disability tax credit. That's the biggest caveat that you'll have to apply for. So the disability tax credit, or DTC, that it's referred to in many cases, is a form that you, 1, have to self-fill out, and then have a medical professional fill out the other side. That gets submitted to the CRA. CRA says yes or no. You get a letter saying yes, you qualify for the disability tax credit. That now allows individuals to do various things: open RDSPs, have the tax credit on when they do their taxes, and it's also retroactive in many cases for someone who may have never applied for one. They could have it back to birth, back to an accident, and a lot of where this usually started from is the born with disabilities: Down syndrome, autism, blind, deaf. But there's also now the other side, the acquired, where you may have been in a car accident, right? Now you have brain injury, or you're in a wheelchair. You now were a functioning individual, now you have a disability, you can apply for that credit. So it can also always go back to the initial start of that, and that's where that program starts for. But it's a way for individuals to save money where they may not have the same opportunities that someone who's not disabled to save money, tax-free, RSPs, etc.
Perfect. That's very detailed. Thank you. How would someone set up an RDSP? What would they need?
So any financial or most financial institutions would have the ability to open an RDSP. I have found the banking channel at just the regular bank branches are very unfamiliar with this, and in many cases they think it's RDSP. They hear RDSP, they provide them a 1-800 number, and it gets very convoluted. And I find a lot of people that qualify just give up because there's too many channels to go through. So this is something that Edward Jones is a company that does this, and this is something that I kind of put on my plate to give back to the community. So anyone in order to open one, has to have, again, a valid SIN number, have to prove that they have a disability tax credit, Canadian resident, sign some papers, and you have an account.
Great. And you help them through that every step of the way.
Right.
That's great. Perfect. Yeah. How can Canadians use the RDSP to build long-term financial stability?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. So, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of individuals, if you're disabled, I know many families that have children that likely will never work, so they can't generate any CPP. They will get OAS, but they have no other way to maybe have a company provide them a pension plan. This is their way to build wealth. Again, you can now get generous government grants of up to $4,500 per year. Some of it is based on income, and some of it is based on contribution. So there's 2 ways to accumulate assets in an RDSP. With that, there's up to $90,000 of government grant money available over the lifetime of the individual to acquire. There's also a $200,000 lifetime contribution limit that you can put in. So right there, depending on what the financial situation is of the individual, they can put up to $200,000, get $90,000 from the government, and have that grow over time. Again, I always tell people, the longer you're in the market, the more time you have for growth with patience. So there is ability to now build some wealth pool there for that individual to take out when they're retired and have some level of income stream where they may have not been able to accumulate that another way.
Right. And so since it's a registered, like part of the sort of the family of registered savings investments like RSPs and RESPs, it's a tax sheltered component similar to RSPs?
Yeah, so there's a few things to consider. One, it is tax deferred growth. So as it's in that plan, it grows tax free. The other things now to consider are, I'll just touch on Ontario law because I'm familiar with the Ontario law. An individual who is disabled could qualify for ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Payments. Where other provinces have their own support payments, the RDSP does not impact the income test or the asset test.
Right.
So they can have now this pool of money outside of an RDSP and still receive their ODSP full.
Right.
Where if they had money in an RSP, TFSA, if they had some type of income, they may lose the ODSP payments that they're receiving from the government because they have too much in assets somewhere or they're getting too much of an income. Right. So any money coming out of an ODSP at any time does not affect the income test, and any assets that are built in the RDSP do not qualify for the asset test. So it's a way to circumvent the ODSP requirements.
Right. And deduction or reduction of that.
Right. So that's a big advantage for those individuals if you're building some type of wealth plan for them to make sure that they still can collect their ODSP, build some long-term assets, and not have any interference with the income test.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Well, you touched on it a little bit already with like the tax credits and the government incentives. Is there anything else you'd like to share in that area?
Yeah, I can maybe a bit more detail. So they are income tested, the contributions from the government. The first level is, and it's always 2 years prior filing. So I do make sure that people understand if it's a child, it's based on the parent or parent's income test when they're under 18.
Okay.
If they're over, and this changes every year with the budget, I think last year was around $100,000 of net income, not gross income. And I know with the budget we just had last week, that'll change again. But right now, if is a parent or parents, if they have the income of over $100,000 of net household income, they qualify for $1,000 for $1,000. So basically, if they put $1,000 into the plan, the government will give them $1,000 back. So 100% return on your dollar. If you fall under that threshold, you get $3,500 for every $1,500 that you put in. So a lot more lucrative. It's almost a 3-to-1 ratio. So you're putting in $1,500, the government will give you $3,500. Now, the other thing to remember is when a minor turns 18, it is now based on their income because they are now of age. So you could eliminate the parent's income if they're high income earners and the child turns 18, they now qualify to their income. So their income test now, if they have no income, there's another threshold which does not require contribution. It is solely based on income test alone. And I think right now that this year, or last year, now they'll change again, but it was around $40,000 of net income. So if an individual is 18, has no income, they will qualify for $1,000 a year on top to get this extra bond, regardless of the contribution. Now, the great thing of all these is that because someone may have had a disability for years, they can retroactively recapture all those grants and bonds all the way back to their disability, but in $10,000 chunks. So if someone will qualify for 10 years of $3,500 contribution from the government, they can't capture them all at once. Now, one of the caveats to this is, and I always tell people, sure, you might be able to put in 3 years worth of contributions of $4,500, get the $10,500 from the government, maybe qualify for the $10,000 bond. So all of a sudden, you put $4,500 in, the account's now worth $23,000 to $24,000. You can't take that money out. It is really what I call long-term, as you mentioned, a pot of assets for long-term growth. And I say, think of it like CPP. You're putting money in, you can't take it out till you're 65. There are other caveats for disabled because they may have a limited life expectancy. But once you put the money in, the government will not let you just take it out tomorrow. There is a 10-year withholding vesting period on the assets that the government gives you. So those dollars do not vest for 10 years. The last year that individual can get government assets is at age 49. So they can contribute all the way up to 49, get the required government bonds or grants. After that, they no longer qualify for those. So anyone who's in that age group that they're near in their late 40s should really take advantage of catching up as much as they can. Now, there's a 10-year period for a reason. After 49, at age 59 is when the RDSP turns into an income stream. The individual can no longer let it grow tax-free. They now have to start taking an income out.
Okay.
Very much like your RSP, where we're going to turn into a RIF, you are mandated to take out. For us, with RSPs, it's at 71. With RDSPs, it's 59. And that's the reason for the limited, there may be a limited life expectancy. You can see that 10-year period from 49, your last grants, to 59. Your last grants that you got from the government will be fully vested. So that money will be yours. Should someone take the money out, if they take their portion out, the government will take the same portion that they put in out as well. If an individual passes away, the same thing happens in that scenario.
So there's a return to the government.
Correct. Whatever the prorated amount that would not have been vested has to come back to the government. So there's things to consider. If people are in hardship, that you're not using this for short term. I like that you mentioned that earlier about long term. That's really what it's for. And
right. Yeah. No. It seems like a great opportunity to capitalize on some government funding.
Absolutely.
And help create further wealth for the presumably family member or loved one that's got the disability that would have a hard time generating that kind of wealth probably themselves, if at all. Yeah. Well, and ODSP in Ontario is obviously helpful and supportive, but may not always be sufficient enough. So this adds to that without reducing or clawing back the ODSP, which is fantastic. Okay, and how does the RDSP work in symmetry or in complement of things like a Henson Trust with wills?
Yeah, so this is a great portion of where lawyers can get involved with financial services companies like myself to have a really broad solution for that individual. So Henson Trusts are unlimited in scope. They can have millions of dollars in there. There's a cap on the RDSP. So those are one of the differences. The Henson Trust does not provide government grants. The RDSP does. So when there's some wealth to distribute to an individual, that's where a lot of planning should be coming into play with the lawyer, with a financial institution or a financial advisor. One of the things to really take into consideration in estate planning, and this was changed in 2011. This was around since 2008. In 2011, the federal government allowed for the RDSP to be transferred to an RSP or a RIF. Sorry, the assets from an RSP or a RIF to an RDSP tax-free.
Okay.
Provided that the individual with the RSP or RIF are a primary caregiver to that individual.
Oh, that's very
It's
good.
huge in the sense that if there was a single parent with a disabled child and they had this RSP and passed away, all those assets would have to come out taxed to the estate, and then the estate would then distribute the after-tax assets to the individual, this disabled person. Now, where if the individual names the beneficiary on their RSP or RIF as the RDSP of their child or grandchild, even if it goes down to grandchild, and they are the primary caregiver, those assets can flow freely without being taxed into the RDSP, provided that they do not go over the $200,000 lifetime threshold of contribution. So if there's still room. So this is a key component that I work with lawyers to make sure if there's a scenario like this and they're the primary caregiver, make sure that that RSP or RIF, if it's a child, can go directly into the RDSP tax-free. Huge advantage.
Yeah, that is huge. So on a point that you said about, you can have RSP or RIF money go into the RDSP, so that's sort of similar to spouse-to-spouse transfer. Like
Correct.
one spouse dies, it just flows to the other, there's no tax. And then you made a point about a limit of age 49. Is that age limit the age of the disabled person, or is it the age of the person contributing to
49, anyone can contribute to an RDSP. technically. I mean, you can take money from it. So, but at age 49, the grants and bonds are no longer available.
And the ages of the disabled person.
Correct.
Got it.
Right.
Got it. Okay, very good. This has been great information, John. Thank you so much for sharing about RDSPs. Is there anything else that maybe I haven't asked you that you think it's important for people to hear and know about RDSPs?
You know, I started this when I first started in the financial services world, and I was looking for a way to want to give back to the community, differentiate myself, and find a way to build my business as well. This has been a real great way for me to meet lawyers like yourself, other accountants, a lot of organizations. I do this as a way to give back to the community, so I actually do not charge there's no fees, account management, etc. It's really my way to give back, so no one ever has to worry, what's this going to cost me? I want to make sure I leave that out there for individuals so that if anyone has this scenario where they need this done, they don't have to worry about that. I have found it's built my network, it's built my community presence, so I continue to be a bit of a crusader, at least in the Halton area, to let people know this is available, reaching out to other accountants, lawyers, and I found that there's a lot of people that do not know about this. There's a stat, this is a few years old though, that about 80 to 85% of eligible individuals are not taking advantage of this program. So there is a lot of opportunity there for individuals. Little things to consider: if you do get a credit and you get 10 years, you can go up to 10 years and refile your taxes. So they're working with an accountant as well would be an advantage, where someone who was disabled did not know they qualified, they can now refile their taxes, get some tax money back, use that to contribute, get the grants. So it becomes almost like a double scenario of assets. And I would just say to anyone, if you're not sure if you qualify or not, submit the paperwork. They're either going to say yes or no. If you're part of an organization, Juvenile Diabetes, MS Society, there's a lot of information on their websites of maybe sometimes verbiage to use to apply that some doctors may not be very good at. Here's some ways to make sure that CRA looks favorably on you. So there are resources within a lot of the organizations of how to, because they've gone through this many times,
right,
of what verbiage to use, how to apply, making sure that you have a favorable outcome when you apply for the disability tax credit. So that's really one of the things that, and the first time you fail and you really believe that you have, I'd say maybe get a second opinion from another medical professional and reapply. And in many cases, they have received it. So don't be shy about applying. The biggest thing I've seen that was a hurdle for a lot of people is they don't want to be labeled disabled by applying. If you feel that you're limited in capacity for some reason, this is your right. This is your opportunity. Take advantage of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you made that last point about the label, so to speak, because ever since I met you years ago and you introduced this to me, and we have several clients every year, coming to do planning or review their planning, and not a large portion, but a portion of them are leaving inheritance to family members or loved ones that are definitely disabled. They would certainly qualify for this, but I know a good portion of those clients typically always sort of bring up that exact point. Not sure we want to create the label yet, right? And it's nice how you put it. Don't really view it as that. View it as this is a great opportunity and a right. Take advantage of having that available to you. It is really fantastic that it's existed since 2008, whereas before that, there was very little extra support in a otherwise very difficult situation for people who have disabled loved ones.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, especially every year with the budget that comes out, I look to see if there's anything that's changed in the RDSP. It's very seldom that there is. One of the things I know a lot of the organizations are pushing for is to raise that $200,000 limit. Because that's been $200,000 since 2008. So even with inflation, they should be looking at a higher. So if there's anyone ever, you ever hear from your member of parliament, if there's something you should do, it says throw that little bit in there to say, hey, look, have you guys looked at raising the RDSP limit? Maybe you should with inflation and everything. That's 15 years ago. It's still the same limit. So those are little tips and tricks that I try to if you ever get in front of your member of parliament.
Perfect. Absolutely. Well, that's good to know. If we ever do, we will. We'll certainly try that. Well, thanks a lot, John, for coming in and giving us this information and recording it with us. We look forward to sharing it with our clients and our followers on social media and so forth. And hopefully we can help many people with this.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, John.